Returning back to the podcast this week is my good friend John McDonough. He has been a professional firefighter for 35 years with the Fire and Rescue New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. He's currently an operational duty commander in charge of 14 stations in the busy inner west zone of Sydney. He was team leader of the fire operational training team, and this team trains all firefighters and officers in structural fire behaviour and firefighting techniques and tactics. Over the last 17 years, this has developed into the standardised doctrine for how firefighters act and behave at the task and tactical level. It is taught at all levels of recruitment all the way up to station officer. He's a co-author of 3D Firefighting, Training Tactics and Techniques, which is published in USA, and in 2009 he was awarded Australia's highest honour of fire officers with Australia's Fire Service Medal for his work in structural firefighting training. In our conversation today, we discuss the importance of acknowledging mistakes in firefighting, creating a culture of learning, and the stigma associated with failure, that sticky word. We explore the complexities of firefighting systems, the balance between simplicity and complexity when it comes to training, and the evolution of ventilation tactics. The discussion emphasises the need for accountability and reflects the progress made in the field, while also addressing the mediocrity that can arise from complacency. Our conversation today delves into the intricacies of firefighting culture, training, and the balance between speed and safety. We discuss the importance of accountability in training, the challenges of maintaining skills, and the dynamics of incident management. We emphasise the need for effective communication and shared expectations among firefighters to enhance operational efficiency and safety. We also delve into the complexities of firefighting itself, focusing on training, decision, and tactical decision making, the balance between procedure and urgency, and the importance of comprehensive training, effective search strategies, and the critical need for mental health awareness and peer support within the profession. We discuss how these elements intertwine to create a safer and more effective firefighting environment. And we also explore the profound impact of the experience in firefighting, the legacy of Paul Grimwood, and the importance of global learning in the field. John shares so many great insights into this, and it went into a different direction that I don't think people would be anticipating from his standard talks around fire behaviour. John shares some personal anecdotes that highlight the challenges and lessons learned throughout his career, emphasising the need for preparation and adherence to established practices. I love the bit where we transition into a really heartfelt tribute to Paul Grimwood, reflecting on his influence and contributions to the firefighting education globally. And then our conversation really concludes with a call to action for firefighters to engage in global learning and mentorship, ensuring the continuation of knowledge and best practice in this incredible community. I hope you really enjoyed today's conversation, and I'll see you on the other side.
The culture certainly in the past was, if you made a mistake, hide it. If you made a mistake, don't admit it. Certainly in the fire service anyway. But as an instructor, we would say in the pre-brief, we would tell them, make mistakes. Because if you make mistakes, you'll learn better. Have a go. I mean, don't be that timid person that's so worried about making a mistake that it inhibits their performance. Have a crack. And if it doesn't work out, we can talk about it later. And I remember doing that in Canada in 2000, it must be about 2017. We were instructing the Canadian instructors in the fire dynamics program that Peter McBride was organising. And I remember saying that in a debrief to the Canadian instructors, and they were all very good firefighters and very good instructors. And one of the students came up after the debrief, but before we went into the container, and she said, I just want to say thank you. And I said, what for? And she said, for allowing me to make mistakes. And in her career, that had never been given to her. And being a female in the fire service, you can just imagine it was even more critical that she did not make a mistake. When I went through the training college and came out as a probationary firefighter for the first 6 months, you would have no stripe or anything. That came after 5 years. But sometime later, recruits would wear epaulets and they would be green. And I always thought that was in bad taste, that they just had to be green because you're green, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know anything. And so we do these sort of things, and it's for the safety of everyone so we can identify who's who and if they're there. But the BA thing's an interesting one because I think there's a perception both, culturally in the organisation and our own perception that we have a high capability in that area, and that we're frequent wearers. We're not. We're sort of frequent checkers of BA. We check BA every day, but we don't wear it. And so I think, and look, there'd be guys that are pretty sloppy at the checking too, and they do that because essentially, and I know as soon as I say things like this, something will happen, but certainly the gear that we have, the BA that we have, the Draeger BA that we have, it's bulletproof. I mean, I just put it on and breathe. It's really not that hard. Putting it on quickly and efficiently without thinking about it is harder, and that takes the reps. And we just don't do the reps. So, I think when it comes to BA, what frustrates me most is not that guys don't eventually put it on well and breathe and operate fire hoses and move into a smoke-filled environment, but I don't want them taking 5 minutes. So I sort of start a session with, we're infrequent users of BA, and that's a problem. And like I said, it's not so much of a problem once people get it on and they start to breathe, because invariably they're leaking air, invariably they've got a bit of hair caught that always annoys them, invariably the flash hoods across because that's just been the struggle it always is, as they repeat that process every fire they go to, but don't think, that's it, I'm not doing that again, I'm now going to do the reps and I'm going to have a system in place. And I think we lost sort of this sense of systems, and I've been sort of investigating them recently, or starting to talk about them, and I think it came about with the non-negotiables. So there was this sense that back when I went to Sweden, that we had systems in place where the traditional training of a firefighter was step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and that was the problem, because they just did stuff without understanding it. And of course that can be the problem. But you know what? Invariably over the last 25 years, having experienced a long look down the other tunnel, if you like, that sort of works pretty well most of the time. If you have a game plan and you have your steps worked out and you can do them rapidly, that normally works out really well, until you come up against something which isn't part of that game plan. And that was starting to happen as our fires were changing, I imagine, from something that had been, cellulose-based fuel and building construction and so on. As that was changing slowly over 40 years, 50 years or whatever, I think some of those systems started to break, and no one really understood why. But I think that we just don't throw those systems out. And when I did a presentation in Poland recently, and it was really about, I don't know if I spoke to you about this before, but an instructor once asked me a really good question. What would I say to my former self if I had the chance to go back in time and talk to myself as a young firefighter? And it's a fascinating question, because what it's really asking is, what do you think is really, really important now that you didn't know then? And it really makes you evaluate a whole range of things. And so I tried to imagine myself going back to 1987 and sitting in front of a 21-year-old and saying, look, they haven't told you this yet, but these things are really important. And I sort of broke it down to, and I sort of put it up here again, that there was some science I didn't know, but that wasn't sort of the big thing in a way. So the science is sort of understanding our job, and the next thing was sort of systems. So how do we do our job? And the last thing was sort of accountability and sort of expectations. So how do we do our job well? So what do I need to know? What are some systems that'll help me? And how do I make myself accountable? And this gets back to wearing BA. Like, do I just wear it shitty each time and just repeat that process and get frustrated when that happens? Or do I do some reps and get to a point where I've got a muscle memory of being able to put it on efficiently each time? So that sort of accountability and expectations is sort of what interests me now. I don't think firefighting is difficult in a sense. I mean, I think a lot of people do a lot more difficult things than we do, both physically and mentally. I think it's an incredible combination of both. And I've always said that our job is being a firefighter is the hardest job in the world to do well, but it's the easiest job in the world to do shitty if we want to, because in some ways we're sort of let off the hook and not accountable for some of our actions, because we can always blame the incident itself. I need to tell my guys to stretch hose and to practice that element of it, but I don't need to tell my rescue guys to cut a car up every week. There's just this incredible different level of accountability when they rock up and the AMBO says to you, if we don't get this person out, they're not going to make it. there is no going defensive, there is no going fourth alarm, there is no going exterior attack. There's just you, and you know hand on heart that you're it. So you're not going to skin that door, and you will know 20 ways to drop the side of that car, and you'll know the operating pressures and hydraulics of every single one of your tools. Ask the same firefighter if he or she knows that about the water hydraulics of their hose line, and they just don't, because they've just compartmentized where do I need to be in my disciplines and the many disciplines that make a firefighter, and they do that to survive. I, you know, because my interest lies, I can nearly sort of leave my rescue guys to themselves, whether that's vertical rescue, whether that's, we have dedicated accredited rescue stations. In New South Wales, what happened when I joined in 87, in 91, up till 91, if there was a road accident, police went, ambulance went, and we went, all statewide forces, and whoever got there first just did something. So we all had some hydraulics, and we'd skull drag people out and so on, and there were, I'm so sad to say, arguments, maybe even fist fights at MVAs, and they said enough's enough, and in 91 they said we're going to allocate accredited rescue stations, and the fire brigade got the majority of those, and it was pretty tense when the police lost most of those. So imagine turning up to an MVA now, and the police, the ex-rescue unit from the police turns up also, and then stands next to you waiting for you to make a mistake, right? So it was a pretty terse for a couple of years, but it also meant that the guys that said I want to go to one of those stations were guys that really saw themselves as wanting to be better at being a firefighter, and that's sort of, culturally they're known as rescue dicks, but it sort of flowed onto a whole range. How they operated in most cases, they tend to be seen as that sort of stuff. All you can do is prepare, and when the game starts, it's just gonna pan out, and we might lose this one, we might have a good outcome. If we don't, we're going to prepare better next time. And I think that to me, in some ways, I'm quite stoic at fires as well, that if we don't do as well as we wanted to, it's because we haven't prepared well. It wasn't because it was a bad fire, it wasn't because we had, we did the wrong things in a sense. It just showed that we weren't well enough prepared. And it's interesting, we have a standard hose lay that, once again, a system that I would have liked to have told my younger self, that we run a 70 at everything, right? A 70 at everything. And then we make a decision, do we just use a 70? Now, most of the time we're going to go, no, we're going to split it, and we're just going to bag a 38 off that, right? And that's, whether it's, and then the second arriving has got an attachment point, and normally that's done for a residence. And we can flow sort of nearly 500 litres out of both of those. But the third thing is we're going to do it even if it's a waste paper bin, because that's the practice, right? And you're never going to get a better practice than that. So that's non-negotiable. That's laid at everything. But we still have problems where I can have some great outcomes. I'll send an email out. The last 10 fires we had, we did this and that. It's really good. And then some of your best guys, they'll break your heart at the next fire, and you'll rock up, and there's just the flake 38, and the fire's out, because that's all it needed was a flake 38. And I go, and I just have to say it. I say that's not what we planned. Where's the 70? Where's the split? Where's that? And you see them sort of, the head drops and all that sort of stuff. And then so that sort of happened a couple of weeks ago. Then we had a second alarm fire at, and the house was going, and I get there, and there's 3 70s laid with 6 38s running off them, and they're all looking at me going, look, so, but it'd be so easy to just say that was good enough, and that put it out, but it wasn't what we agreed on, and that's the compliance I'm talking about. I had another fire back in my old zone, and once again, they were the gun crew, and so imagine this fire. It's a kitchen manufacturing place, but a local type of one. It's not a huge one, but maybe it's 50 meters by 20 meters building, open, with all the timber and the kitchen making machines. But yes, and he had a big boat in there as well, so they were doing quite well. So the alarm companies rang him and said, the movement sensors have gone off. And he's basically said, well, I'm not going. It could be a robber or something, right? You guys deal with it. Then they rang him back straight away and said, the power's gone down. So he's gone, oh, well, I better go. So he goes there and finds that he's got a fire. He goes in the man door next to the roller shutter door, and there's a fire, a growing fire. So he rings 000, and then he looks at his boat and says, I'm going to pull my boat out, and at least we'll save that. But because the power's down, he has to open the roller shutter door, right? And it drops off the runner. So it stops at about. So he's frantic. So he gets a forklift and tries to force it up. And this is when the first station arrives. So they've seen this guy in there in the smoke. He moves in, sees the guy, eyeballs the fire, pattern recognition against previous fires. Probably the busiest fire station in Sydney, I would say, 62 station. And this guy's no bunny, right? He's eyeballed that. He's taken the guy out, and then he's got the attack 38, and he's put the fire out. And I've arrived, and I've had a fantastic job. I said, this is spinning the dice to say whether this place burns down. Your window was like this, and you guys nailed it. And I said, but you didn't run the 70. That's not what we did. And I felt like a dick saying it. I could see him just, and then I said, but you had a great outcome, but that's not the way we got that outcome. You missed the opportunity to practice that lay. And he got it. And he straightened up and said, right. And so there's a classic example of a great outcome, but they failed in the implementation. And if we didn't have a different implementation, they would fail sometimes and win sometimes, fail sometimes and win sometimes. And I think we just get used to doing that. We just, it can be a extinguisher, a first aid reel, a 38 or a 70. You've got all those options. And you're going to reinvent it every time you arrive. Whereas we just have a system that says we're going to run hose where we can flow maximum. And if we don't, we drop back to the next level and we run 38s. We can still throw some decent water. And we're going to do it every time to practice. And guys go, that's good. You've just taken away all the stress and anxiety of deciding which fall we were going to use, right? Or defaulting to just the easiest one. But then you find out that system is the easiest one out anyway, because it's the one we practice all the time, right? So there's an example of a system. I never had a system as a young firefighter. I owe him a lot, an enormous amount. He was the spark that set me off on where I ended up in this career. I read Fog Attack just as I was an officer, a new officer. Now Fog Attack was written, I think, 94, maybe 96. I got made an officer in 98. So I'm a new officer and I'm sort of reading stuff. And I can't even remember where I got it from. Maybe it was the brigade library, maybe it was lying around at a fire station, and I just picked it up. And I always refer to Fog Attack because essentially it's a comparison of fire services all around the world, just with numbers, right? If they have this many people, how many ladders do they have? And so it's a comparative type of thing, which is interesting in itself when you start to look at, well, where do we fit into that? But it had chapters on the new type of firefighting, for want of a better word, coming out of Scandinavia, in particular Sweden. And I'm reading that, and so imagine, so this is 2001. I joined 87. So what's that? I've been in the job for 14. What's that? My maths, 14 years, right? And I've just become an officer, and which takes about 10 years minimum. So I'd become an officer some years before. You spend some time relieving, so this was my first permanent station. So the earliest you can become an officer, a station officer for us, is 10 years. So I'd just done that. So I was confident. I was full of myself in terms of my own abilities and so on, which I think is important. I mean, it sort of sucks when someone says you're not as good as you think you are, but you should back yourself, right? You should be confident. That's a good word, a healthy self-confidence, right? So I'm reading this and I'm going, and then that coincided with the facts that came out that said you can apply for some trips overseas, and there was 4 different ones, and one was training. And I said, well, I've got an idea. I want to go and learn about this. To cut a long story short, well, actually, no, I'll tell the full story because I think this is important too, and has a British. There might be something similar in Britain, but so I wrote a report, quite a damning report actually, where I used our annual report and said every annual report says that the fire service is world's best practice, and we did as well. And I said, well, if that's the case, why don't we know these things and so on, and why wasn't I taught these things? And anyway, the end result was I was about to put it in. I gave it to a colleague, and he said, who was a sort of a principal instructor, we had a different system then, and he said, this is great, but it's already been done. And previously, someone had gone over it a year or two earlier, and actually done a course with Sean Raffel, I think, at Uppsala, which was a fire service in Sweden that did some international courses. And we had containers and a system in place for nearly 2 years. And I've gone, oh, okay, well, I was about to tear it up, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm an operational officer here and I know nothing about this. So the implementation has failed. If we're just putting recruits in boxes and melting helmets, the implementation has failed. And that was sort of what it ended up seeing. So I rewrote some of it, and they said, yeah, you can go. Now, a couple of things had happened just before that. We had 3 civilians killed in a silo backdraft in 2000. I think it was 2000. And we had gone to court as an organisation because we didn't keep a safe workplace, certainly for those people, and it caught us by surprise. And that's no reflection on the guys there. It really wasn't in our training or anything like that. And heaven forbid any one of us standing there would have done exactly the same thing. So part of that was a fine from our occupational health and safety, which basically it might have been $500,000 or something like that, but it meant that had to go back into training. So that is sort of what's happening in the background, which I wasn't aware of. But I think that also helped in the sense that we needed to look at fire behaviour training. So I went to Sweden. So before I went to Sweden, so I contact Paul Grimwood. I don't know him from a bar of soap, except he wrote the book that gave me the spark to say we need to do better. And as I was soon to find out, Paul did exactly what Paul would do with anyone that asked him. I said, you don't know me, but I read your book, Who is the Best Guy in Sweden? And he said, Niels Bergström, Nisse Bergström. That would be a good person to interview, actually, if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of that era, that 80s era that led to what both Australia and Great Britain and much of the European world then saw as a way of teaching and fighting fires. And so I went over, so he introduced me essentially to Nisse, and I spent some time with Nisse, and then I went to England and spent some time with Cornwall and Devon, who also had a relationship with Sando, the National Fire College, where Nisse Bergström was working. And I visited Paul while I was over there. And for the first time got to meet him face to face. And that was the first time until last year was the second time face to face, right? So just to put that in perspective of what happens when you're 16,000 kilometres apart. I remember one thing that really struck me then was we were in the back of where he was living at the time. It was a sunny day, and we sat down, we started talking. He said, oh, stop for a moment. And he just went and got a pen and paper. And then we continued our conversation, and he's writing stuff down. I should have been writing stuff down, right? And this was the measure of the man that constantly learning and looking for opportunities. Yes, there you go. There you go. But it struck me. Yeah. But it struck me at the time that he was the guru, right, for me. And here he was thinking that I might say something that was knowledgeable and important enough to write down. And that just struck me incredibly at the time. Then I went my separate way. We kept in contact. It really was the start of the world opening up and being a small place in terms of email. And now we're doing this, right? And in 2005, he invited myself, Sean, and Ed Harton. Talk to Ed Harton too. There's another name if you've thought Ed Harton, and a masterful educator and writer. And I would say the same for Paul. And he invited to write 3D Firefighting with the 4 authors, and of course I was flabbergasted that, with where I was in my career and so on, and but that was the nature of the guy, and over the next 20 years, more than 20 years, constantly there as a sounding board. It was the email I wrote to him that I think we've invented the Mark I short pulsing robot. what do you think, and all of that sort of stuff. But in many ways, like I said, that initial meeting didn't catch up with Paul again. No, I did in Belgium in 2016. The IFIW Paul attended, so that would have been second time face to face with Paul, apart from these just the normal correspondence. And then more recently, the correspondence would be messenger. One of us might be reacting to something and then counter-reacting online, and then taking it privately and having more discussions. And I've got to say, some of them were extremely robust. Extremely robust. And I think you can only have that with someone you respect enormously and who respects you enormously, that you want it to be extremely robust. Tell me I'm wrong. Break what I'm trying to say. And, you know, yeah, 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 yeah. Because I tell you what, yeah, yeah, yeah. No. Yeah. That's right. And if you're not willing to do that, you don't care enough about what you think is right. So, and sometimes I probably care too much about what other people think and whether I'm right or wrong. But in some ways, I don't really care what people think, but I'll defend what I think. And sometimes I probably hold on to things longer than I should, but I care enough about them that I will argue till I'm blue in the face in some cases. Yeah, but getting back to Paul, um, we could have those discussions because I always saw Paul as having some pushing hard in the opposite directions sometimes because he felt it necessary. Like, if guys are using first aid reels too much and that became the CFBT model of single containers with first aid reels, that's a problem. That was never a problem for us because we were flowing nearly 500 litres per second out of 38s. Now, you could argue that 38 is too small as well. Um, but to go from first aid reels and say you should be using 52, I would push back and say, well, I think 38 is a better option for that. But I could see what Paul was trying to say, that, let's push far this way and get something here, or, um, if you came in late to the party, it would probably look like Paul was saying that container training was useless. Um, I don't, but what he was trying to do was have a very strong reaction to some things that weren't working properly and the context that wasn't there. And I think he did that really, really well. So he was a sounding board right to the end. And I was really, Carol and I, when we were in England not last, the time before that, we were, when we did some stuff at the Fire Services College, we drove back and visited Paul at home. And there was a sense that he was, certainly not well then, so a year and a half ago or so on. And so yeah, it was sort of, that was definitely, his health was not improving, but it was fantastic it was like, we we didn't discuss any of those things. It was just, how good is this to be together again and to sort of just talk about the job that we love and so on. And I suppose in some ways that I think a lot of British firefighters probably don't realise enough about who Paul was. And, in my own organisation, because with the way we reference our work and so on, he is known, I hope, as well as he should be. I definitely, I don't think, I would put Ed Harton up there, that Ed and Paul are probably the most concise writers of good stuff for firefighters I've ever seen, in terms of conciseness, context, that I don't want to say it's an easy read, but it should be an easy read. If if you're explaining something well, it's an easy read, and they provided it. And both of those guys, just educators, just brilliant educators. Like, it's easy to talk, but when you get down to writing stuff, and now it's there, it's got to be concise and it's got to be unbreakable, because now you've written it down. You're basically saying anyone can now quote this back to me. That's my opinion, right? And we don't write a lot of stuff. I can't think of any better educator and writer, and that's why his books are so successful. For firefighters, I would say Enclosure Fires by Bankston, I think, is a beautifully written book for that. Anything that Ed Harton writes, I could only hope to write stuff like those guys. But Paul was right up there, if not the best, and that's that's the beauty that he has. He has the legacy of those documents for people, for all generations of firefighters to read. And I I ended up, as I was thinking about what the legacy of Paul was to me, apart from the spark that that, that set me off in a way, was you had Massey Shaw, you had Greywood. There's a third guy there now. It's Grimwood, and the way that we talk about, well, firefighters that have studied the history of their craft talk of Braidwood and Massey Shaw in sort of revere, add another name to it, and it's Paul Grimwood.